Welcome to OJAS OASIS. This is a place where you will learn how to optimize your body, mind, and spirit in ways you have longed for a long time, perhaps your entire life. Our mission is to help you cultivate, nourish, and protect your OJAS, your immunity, and inner peace. That was so lovely. Thank you, Geoff, for doing a quick guided pranayama meditation. It was very nice to begin our conversation in that way. And it's so simple, but oftentimes that's what you need. You need something short and effective to get ready to go into something. So thank you for doing that and welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Absolute pleasure to be here. It was always nice. Yeah, it is always nice to have like a little set of something that you can do just to fully bring yourself into alignment, because sometimes we don't have 10 minutes or 15 minutes or, to do it. So, yeah.
Exactly. Especially nowadays. It's always the calendar is often stacked or things run longer, and then the next thing, things get reordered. And so it's so nice to just have these tools under our belt, to have these like quick kind of like a reset button. And I think we can get into more of those types of tools, because I know you're also, we're going to be talking about Jyotish today, but I know meditation is also a big part of your practice and what you teach and what you offer. And before we get into everything, I should mention that to listen to those of you listening, Geoff and I met in India very briefly, but it was a really wonderful connection. That it was one of those things that you just like resonate with someone really quickly, and I just liked Geoff's energy. It was really that simple, and he was leading a group of people to the place where I had decided to do my second 200-hour teacher training at Sattva. And I just loved his group and his positivity. And I was very, I just remember I was immediately like, oh, he would be a great person to chat with on all these topics. And the fact that you're also from Australia gives like more of a global perspective on how are people doing it out there versus how we're receiving it and sharing it over here. So I thought that would be like a really fun, new, fresh voice to bring in and to explore these topics with. So, yeah, I'm so excited that we finally figured out the time zone thing and
Yeah.
all that. It's not the easiest thing sometimes. That sometimes is the hardest part to schedule, just scheduling somebody, especially when they're on the other side of the planet, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. Yeah. And I felt the same way when I met you too, Sasha. Like
Aw.
it's been like one of those things. And we've kept in contact actually the whole time, really, because I only met you. We were only there for 4 days, really, the group that I was there at Sattva, because then we went to Varanasi and stuff. So we were only there, but like we've kept in contact ever since, and we finally got this to happen. So it's
Yeah.
great. I'm very excited. Yeah.
That's the beauty of having community spaces like Sattva. And it's one of my favorite things about traveling all together, is just the connection and the community that we create and discover and build and maintain. So, yeah, it's just thank you to the universe for introducing us, and I'm proud of us for keeping it going. Um,
Yes.
so I always like to ask the first question kind of off the cuff, but it's always interesting to learn about how people find this knowledge, how people find the Vedas. So I wanted to ask you, how did you find the Vedas, or how did the Vedas find you in your life?
I'm someone that, like, I was brought up a strict Catholic, and I think that, and I was, I didn't really, I was always asking questions from probably from the time I was like 6 or 7. I was like, some things didn't make sense to me, for example. So I was like one of those people who was just on a quest for understanding, I suppose. And then but I was an altar boy, and I used to play the organ at church, and I did all that stuff to me, like so. But I'm also someone that just listens. I was always like listening and asking questions, and a lot of them couldn't be answered the way I needed them to be answered, you know. And so I think that as I got older, especially once I left school, then I started to look for more stuff. So then I kind of got more into like self-help books, and I was lucky when I was 23, I went to go live in Hong Kong. And so when I lived in Hong Kong, I really saw Buddhism, for example, was like a really big thing there. So I had Chinese friends, and I ended up going and studying Buddhism for a while. So I really went down that path. I just read lots of books on it. I was lucky that people were inviting me to different things that they were doing. So I got to experience that. And then I went to Malaysia after that. And then that's where they're a very Muslim country. So I remember that the first day I was training, like a lot, I used to work in television. I had a whole 20-year television career before this.
Wow.
So I went to set up a sports channel in Malaysia. And then the first question they asked me was like, what do you believe in? And at that point, I didn't really think about where I was. And I started going like, oh, well, I believe in the universe and I believe in all these things, but still hadn't really found Vedic knowledge. And, but knew there was an understanding of like a universal kind of thing. And then they were like, have you read the Quran? And I was like, no, but if you give me an English copy of it, but I'll have a lot of questions, you know, I'll read it. So the next day there was a copy of it on my desk, and I read it. And, you know, I was going through reading it, and I was asking the questions. And, you know, when we did Ramadan and the fasting and everything, I did everything that they did. I was the same. I just, whenever I go in, I go like all in. So I did that. And then I went to London for a few years after that. Then I did Scientology. So as you can see, I was like on this quest for something, you know, I was looking for like, where's the truth, I suppose. And I think the thing was for me was that it was more about, I believe that everything was right, that Muhammad was right, Jesus was right, you know, Buddha, that they all, that there's like if you actually really broke them all down to their core, there's like an underlying truth under all of it. And then I started studying Vedic meditation, or went and learnt Vedic meditation, or which was like transcendental meditation. And so, you know, and that all comes from the Vedas. And Tom was my teacher then. And so it was like about, you know, it was like this guy who all of a sudden could explain life, but through a Vedic lens. And then he was talking about Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and their different stages of consciousness and like what they were bringing into the world. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I've kind of been looking for. And so then it was like, okay, now I need like all the knowledge. And so I was just starting to like, you know, after that, I just did like a full deep dive into it. But it all made so much sense that it really changed my whole life, because at that point I had a full television career and I just used to go on meditation retreats in January and stuff like that. But then it was like, as I learned more and I started putting it into practice into my life and I started doing that stuff, then I think that it changed the way I lived my life, because I had new belief systems and new values and new structures, and an understanding of like, you have to really look after yourself and control your thoughts, and not control, but just be understanding that our thoughts create our reality. And, you know, and then even I just really loved even at the beginning, I didn't really go into the Devas with Shiva and Shakti and, you know, Ganesh and stuff like that. That confused me. I used to think, how the hell do people know that stuff? But it's interesting that as you go on and the more you do it, they all of a sudden become part of the whole process anyway. And then you really understand them like from a perspective of like what they teach you, I suppose. And so, yeah, I just really, it was one of those things. It's been like a little journey of self discovery, and, you know, like people always say the journey, but it is like, it has been a journey, and it's been fun and interesting. And, you know, and then I was really lucky that I met Anand not long after I kind of started, but that was before Sattva even existed. Sattva was just a studio on top of his dad's shop, you know, so it
Wow.
was like, there was no Sattva. So, as it is today.
Hmm.
But you know, and I was really lucky that I kind of met him as well, and so I kind of had two kind of Vedic teachers, I suppose, around that time that I was learning from and sitting in on lectures of and doing retreats, etc. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And then all of a sudden, then obviously I threw my career away and went to India to study for months at a time.
Now I'm so intrigued about the TV career because I didn't know about this. What exactly did that entail? Or you don't have to get like super into it, but like
No, no, it's
broad
fine.
brushstroke.
Yeah, no, I was someone who I grew up in North Queensland in Australia, so a really regional little town, and so I worked in a TV station there when I first went finished grade 12 actually. because back then you really just did work experience. There was no media studies and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know why I chose it. I went to the phone book to do work experience in grade 12, and I was like, I'm just going to go watch TV for 2 weeks. That's actually that was my thought process. But obviously, understanding how I understand the universe now and the way nature works, it's quite interesting where I feel like, oh, it's interesting that that's what happened. Like obviously I feel like now, like I was meant to go through the phone book and see NQTV, North Queensland Television, and like go and do that. So when you went and worked in television in a regional area, you literally used to get trained on everything rather than specializing in like one thing and getting this job as an editor, for example, or this job as a producer. You kind of got to it was like a apprenticeship where you got to learn everything. And I think having that grounding was really good. And then I moved to Sydney later on, and then I met um, some people who then wanted to set up channels in Hong Kong for Rupert Murdoch and stuff like that as well. So he had Star TV. So there was only 8 channels. And then I went there when I was 23. I was one of those people who I used to say yes before I realized what I'd said yes to.
Uh-huh.
And so, I got off like, oh, would you like to come and help us do this? And I was like, yes, sounds great. And then 3 months later, I was living in Hong Kong, but I can always remember the first day landing in Hong Kong and looking out the window and looking at these buildings and going like, what have I done? Because I never thought about anything past the point of actually when I got there. And then I go and turn up at this like big place. And then, in the end, I launched like 42 channels there. So it was like for Star TV. And then I ended up getting asked to go to Malaysia after that to do these sports channels, which I did. And then I did the Commonwealth Games in 98 for them as well. And then I went to London, and then I did Disney Channel UK. And I also did a Playboy TV. So I also did a porn channel. So I've had, all ends of the spectrum, but
Wow.
I didn't do porn. I only did a Playboy TV for 6 months. Then I moved into Disney because I was like, I can't do this. And then,
Wow.
so yeah, I was doing that there. And then I came back to Australia, and then I was working at Channel 10, and I was, working in programming and operational side there. And then went to Foxtel as well, which was like a pay TV company. And then was the general manager for the general entertainment channels. And then after that, I threw it all away.
Hmm.
Well, not really threw it away, actually. I had enough. When you get somewhere, yeah, and this is a good example for lots of people as well as understanding. Like I kind of got to the top of the tree of where I thought I wanted to go when I climbed the ladder, because at that point in my life, all I'm doing is just like climbing the ladder, going like everyone's going like, well, you need to be that, and so you kind of like doing it. I was very good at once I set my mind to something of like doing it. And I think I was young as well. I was lucky that I kind of had all this amazing experience when I was young that I just really propelled me to the top faster. And but then I remember sitting in that big office one day with like 70 staff and a whole floor of people in a big office, and I was like, I just remember sitting in there one day and I was watching everyone coming in, and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore, and that's when I was like, but I thought, well, if I leave here, like, where do I go? I'd already worked at a few different places in Australia. There was only really one other channel that I hadn't actually worked at, so I thought, but if I go there, I'm going to do the same thing I'm doing here. And I thought my only way out is out. So at that particular point, I was like 39 as well. I'd also had a whole cancer experience that had happened like during that period as well, which had taken me through. And I did Ayurveda and all that kind of stuff. So that was already leading me down. I took like an Ayurvedic approach to my cancer. And
Wow.
then, and so the, I had I had been meditating already maybe for about 4 or 5 years. So I'd been like very consistently doing meditation. So I was definitely I used to go on meditation retreat every January kind of thing in India. I used to go to India, like, just that was like my reset. Every January I went there, that was like my thing. I'd go there, do that, come back, work really hard. And then, and so then I thought like, well, actually I can't go and study all this Vedic knowledge where they say, take a leap. If you just like take a leap, then nature's going to support you in ways that you didn't know and stuff like that. But I was like, well, if that's true, then I thought the only
Exactly.
way to move into the area that I wanted to move in was to actually create a string in my bow. I thought I didn't have any skills right now to be able to quit this job and do another job, for example, or be a meditation teacher or do whatever. So I thought, well, let's go and do the meditation teacher training first. So that was like 3 months in India, like 14 hours a day meditation, all that kind of stuff. So it was like, so I went to India first for nearly 5 months I went, but 3 of those months was spent becoming a Vedic meditation teacher. So I did that, but then I came back to Australia, and then I had one string in my bow, and then I launched Red Bull TV, which was the last TV thing that I did in Australia. And then, but that was like my funding mechanism while I flipped it over, so I could do it. And then after that, I studied Himalayan breathwork and Sattva yoga with a nun. And then I also did astrology. And so it was just a matter of putting more strings in your bow, because now I can do this as a full-time job.
Yes. Oh,
Sorry, I know that
so
was like a
many.
long answer, but I think sometimes it really helps people understand that like life is a journey, and it is about taking leaps and following your intuition, and not being afraid just to give it a go. Because I mean, what's the worst thing that happens? You can just go back and do what you were doing, or if you need to go back for a while, or like I drove Uber for a while.
Mm,
There was like 6 months there where I struggled for a bit, where I didn't want to go back into corporate because I needed the time to do whatever. And as hard as that was for me, being someone who was like an executive in television, to then go and like drive Uber and praying every day, like, please don't let me pick up anyone that I know.
right.
Um,
Oh.
you know, but, it was actually something that we live in a gig economy now. So you know what, you could do that. You can do that. And, when I changed my perspective on it, instead of looking at it as a negative thing, I was working towards something that I really wanted. So it gave me the opportunity that I didn't drive every day, but if a bill came in that I needed to pay, I knew that I could just drive in the car. I knew how many hours in the car I had to drive to pay that bill, for example.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's good. I think there's so many points of what you just said that sounded so familiar to my own journey, because I had also left a career that was pretty established and, what some might think of as, that's you kind of made it. You made it into the place where a lot of people are trying, and then a younger version of you was really hopeful of that outcome, and then you kind of reach this place within yourself of there's something else out there or something within yourself, and you just know that you have to listen to that voice, whatever that intuition um, or that soul voice is saying. um, we have to listen to that. And if you don't mind, if you don't mind actually sharing about the cancer, because I think that sometimes things like cancer show up. They don't just show up overnight. First of all, as an Ayurvedic doctor, I can tell you that cancer is something that like can really only thrive in an environment that is particularly out of harmony. So like when we're living out of harmony or out of alignment with our soul for a long time, that creates a really perfect environment for like some sort of mutation to spread, right? That's just
Yeah.
kind of how it works, from like the subtle to the gross. So what would you mind sharing? We don't, again, not having to go super into detail, because I know
Yeah.
we want to
Yeah.
talk about astrology today, but
No,
this
I
is
know
this is a
exactly.
huge
Yeah.
part. This is, I think this is all of this, like the journey as teachers and forever students and practitioners. I think all of it is really relevant,
Yeah.
to explore
No,
that.
yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that, at that particular time in my life, I was head of a sports channel in Australia. And so I had a very high stress job. And had probably had a high stress job for a few years before that as well. Like, high stress in terms of like, yeah, it was just busy. I was working a lot, but I loved my job. So even though I say high stress, it wasn't like I was stressed out of my mind and whatever. There was like lots of travel. I was always like going. Sometimes I was in Sydney and Melbourne twice in a day. I would like wake up in Melbourne, be in Sydney for work, which is where our office was, and then I'd be back in Melbourne that night for an event, because there was just lots of stuff to do with that. But my life was, when you say the environment was done, like I also had a nickname of being Party Jeff.
Mm.
I was like, if you wanted to have a good time at a party, you invited me. And then
That's not surprising. You're still the
and
party.
then
Yeah.
no, I can be, yeah. I mean, it was really funny because a lot of friends that knew me during that time, they said like, "Oh, you went from being Party Jeff to Guru Jeff." Like they said, like, yeah, you're like our inspiration or aspiration. That it is possible to like do that and do that. But I think that at that particular point in my life as well, I had no desire to like ever like leave my TV career or anything like that. And I think that I was also working in a job where, it was high stress and lots of like box seats, but it was because it was a sports channel. I was like at sporting events or other events every night. So pretty much my dinner every night was like alcohol and canapes. That was like my dinner.
Wow.
When I used to wake up every morning, I'd have a big long black coffee, and lunch was whatever lunch was, kind of thing. But if you think about that, if you understand the difference between alkaline and acidity and all that kind of stuff, like when I think about that, I
Hmm.
think, wow, my body was literally just like
Super acidic.
acid central.
Yeah.
Oh, could you imagine with all that alcohol? Because I used to drink 5 or 6 beers probably, or depending on if most of the time I wasn't driving, so it didn't really matter, like because I was staying in a hotel nearby or something. So yeah, and then I just know that I was eating canapes. Like I was probably 20 kilos heavier as well, just because I was living the good life, and and I'm 6'5", so I always carried it well, where you couldn't really tell that much, I suppose. I mean, I knew, but other people probably didn't. But yeah, so it was just that there. And then it was interesting I found it accidentally as well. So at the beginning of that year at the TV station I worked at, they used to do these things called executive health checks. So, and it wasn't compulsory. It was actually something that you just did if you wanted to. But they used to, if you did the health check, then they would like almost give you a health kind of bonus where you could put it towards, they would pay for your gym membership, for example, and
Oh,
do things like that. It was like a
that's
way of
awesome.
like,
Incentivizing.
well, it was incentivizing, but also paying you more money without paying you more money, for example.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean? It
yes,
was kind of like
yes.
that kind of thing, almost like when you lease a car and all that kind of stuff. It was that kind of thing. So, so we did that there. So I ended up thinking like, well, I'm 39 this year. I'm going to go and do this executive health check. So I remember like I used to smoke cigarettes back in the day as well and stuff like that. Not like a big smoker, but definitely social smoker. And I had to do like breathing and this thing where you're like breathing to check your lungs, and they were like, wow, you're like got the lungs of a non-smoker. And I was like, yeah. Well, I said, well, not really, but like they said, don't if you are still smoking, don't do it anymore. And then we did blood tests and stuff like that. And my dad had prostate cancer when he was like about 55, 56. And so when they were testing mine, I was like, oh, can you check my PSA? And they were like, are you 50? And I was like, no, but my dad had it like 55. So I'd like to know that I'm turning 40 soon. Like when I was 40, it was like zero. So I've always got like a baseline of like knowing where it was. But that ended up not being the case, where it came back and it was like
Mm.
quite high. So, when they gave me back my results, they were like, wow, you're really good, but except for this bit. And then even like when I did go to a urologist and stuff like that, and they were talking about, they kept saying abnormal cells rather than the C word. And
Mm.
I didn't really know what they were talking about. Then all of a sudden they talked about operating, and then maybe might have to have radium or chemo and stuff. And I was like, what? And I was like, what does abnormal cells mean? And they were like, oh, you have cancer. As soon as they said that, I didn't hear anything else. But there
Yep.
was also a voice inside my head that said, we're not doing that. Like we're not going to go down that whole route. And so,
The chemo
at
path.
that particular,
Hmm.
yeah. So I really, he just said like I was lucky I got it really early, so it was non-aggressive, and then I had time to go and investigate stuff. And interestingly enough, like bringing it back to Vedic meditation, I ended up at that particular point in time, Ayurveda was not a thing. I'd never even heard that word before. And it wasn't like it is now, where if you may have heard it, or you might even see it on a label in a shop with in honey or something, um, but I remember I went to a Vedic meditation group meditation night, and I was a bit late, and I ended up sitting on the floor in front of these like two ladies who were behind me that I didn't really know, and they were people were talking to them about this thing called Panchakarma.
Ah.
And they're like, oh, like I just said, they were going, wow, you look really good. And they're like, oh, we've just done Panchakarma, we've just like done this stuff. And I'm thinking like, what the hell is that? And then they were like, oh, and then people were like, what is that? And they're like, oh, it's like an Ayurvedic detox where they like break your body down and they rebuild you and all that stuff. And I get in my head, I was like, that's what I need. I need to be broken down and rebuilt. And so when it finished, I turned around and I said, oh, can I take you guys for a coffee tomorrow or something? And they were like, yeah. So I went and met them the next day. And then I said, what is this Panchakarma thing? And then it kind of opened my whole world to Ayurveda. And then I went to India, I did a meditation retreat, and then I went into Dr. Raju's clinic and did Panchakarma. And that was like my first thing. And then after that, I did it probably twice a year for 30 days at a time for 5 years.
And that cleared the cancer, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Wow.
I had a very strict lifestyle as well. You know, no alcohol, no dairy, no sugar, no meat. I did like, very alkaline diet.
Mm-hmm.
I still had a procedure and stuff like that to go in and like check everything and like all that kind of stuff as well. Like, so it wasn't like I didn't do anything. It was actually mainly for, I mean, if I actually had my time again, I was young, still learning a lot of stuff. Um, I would do it differently. I probably wouldn't do what I did actually in terms of like the procedure. Um, but mainly because I was only young. And I think that at that particular point in my life as well, I was thinking like, I don't want to go and eat a piece of cake or drink a glass of wine if I wanted it or something like that, and then feel like that was going to bring it back, for example. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of like not having to have any extra chemo or radium and all that kind of stuff as well, like that actually was big for me because I did not want to put that in my body. Yeah, because sometimes if you get things late and you have to do it, then I get it.
Right,
Do you know what I mean?
right.
Like, but I think if you get it early enough, because I was lucky that I did get it early, that I had all of a sudden options were available to me rather than just going down one what the route that I was told. Especially because my intuition was telling me something different.
Mm-hmm. It was lifestyle based. It was a lifestyle based disease,
Yes,
which
100%.
and
And it changed my whole life.
the Panchakarma, or getting the diagnosis and then getting introduced
Yeah,
to.
and then you actually know what the funny thing was that I got diagnosed in like February, and then in July, someone came in and bought the channel, that bought the actual channel that I was in, and I got made redundant. So I found I had cancer, got made redundant within 6 months. I thought the sky was going to fall in. You
Wow.
know, I thought my life was like, but it was actually the disruption I needed because at that particular point in my life as well, I didn't know who I was. When my phone stopped ringing and no one cared who I was anymore because I couldn't put their sport on TV or I couldn't, you know, do whatever. No one cared who I was anymore. All of a sudden, I became this like big guy who was very popular. To my phone stopped ringing. Apart from just like the few friends that I had, do you know what I mean? Like, and that was like a very interesting thing to go through as well because then I remember thinking to myself, "Who am I?" That was when the
Mm.
journey started. Actually, that was when the journey into meditation got deeper. That was when I was the Vedas, exploration got deeper. That was probably it was actually the turning, definitely a massive turning point for me in my life. That whole part.
What a
It
beautiful
led me to
journey.
here, actually. It led me to sitting in front of you right now talking about this because had it not have happened, I probably would have stayed in television because at that particular point, if I really think back to how I was definitely not someone who I loved my job.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
loved it so much. Like, it was never ever a job. I loved it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's amazing how often the things that in the moment feel like they're killing us are actually the things that are setting us free. And
Yeah.
it's always like that. It's so hard to see it that way in the moment, and we get that clarity later when the pain kind of surpasses the clouds clear and the sunshine kind of starts to, you know, burst through and we see the light. But um, that's so incredible that, like, you were introduced to Ayurveda, and I don't think that was a coincidence. That whole,
No
conversation and these
way.
people, and we are always being guided. We are always being um,
But are we listening?
supported. Right, right, right. Exactly. And yeah, it's are we listening? And also, if we do listen, do we act in accordance? Which that is like a perfect entry point to the Jyotish, because they say, and we've had astrologers on the show. I love talking about Jyotish. Jyotish are the eyes of the Vedas, as that's been traditionally, uh, that's believed to be the case in the tradition of the Vedas. Is you can really see the soul, the map of the soul through somebody's birth chart, their astrology chart. And it's really, something that I've been wanting to study in more depth. And I'm also, you know, because once you kind of start on this path with the Vedas, you want to learn everything. Like you were saying, everything starts to kind of like fold in, and similar to baking, how you like fold in the ingredients, like you fold them in, then
Yeah.
you got to get the eggs, or the egg substitute for the vegans out there, the applesauce, or like the sugar, and then you know, um, I don't know what else, chocolate chips, whatever it may be, like the flour and the water and all that. Um, but you just know that you'll be a better, for example, in your case, meditation teacher, when you can see that macrocosmic perspective, really, really zoom out and see a person beyond what is presenting at face value, and you can really see a person. I mean, you can see a person with acute presence and, you know intention and love when your heart is open. You can do that, but with a birth chart, it's really amazing being able to see things in someone's chart and validate a lot of these experiences in life moments, like the ones you were just sharing with me, that are like the big life-changing moments of a human being's life, that
Yeah.
change the way that you see yourself and your purpose and what gives you value, and what is what are the options when it comes to healthcare, and does it really have to be, one size fits all, or can you kind of like intuitively choose your own path? And all these things just start coming up. So um the first most probably obvious question, but I think it's a good entry point into the conversation about the birth chart, is how would you answer the question of how does one live in accordance with their birth chart, with their astrology chart? And maybe we can start with what the astrology chart, um, like what you look at when you do a reading with somebody who comes to you.
Yeah, when I do a reading, I really like to I like to look at the whole chart straight away and look at where the planets are, where they're born. Like I know it's really interesting, like talking to other people who do it and seeing how they do it. Because some people just look at specific things, whereas for me, I'll always like to do an overall reading first. Like I just find that really helps you understand the energies that are at play in your life. Because if there's a planet in a house, in a house is this particular star sign, the 12 houses, 12 signs. If there's a planet there, it normally means that that's an area of your life that you're energetically you're going to have to be conscious of, you know. So so I think that I really, for me, whenever I do a chart, I like to go like, well, this is your chart, this is your rising sign, your ascending sign, this is going to be the flavor of your life, because the rising sign like really tells you what you're going to be experiencing, or how the lens that you'll be experiencing life through, actually. And so the rising sign is what star sign is rising on the easternmost horizon at the time that you were born. And so it's like when you see that sign, which is normally different if you do Western astrology and stuff, it's that's normally your sun sign, not your rising sign. um and so, when you look at that lens, and for example, if you've got like no planets in your first house, then that's pretty much the lens that you can easily look at your life through. But let's say you have a planet there like Saturn, then it means that there could be some challenges that have coming up in your life. And even though Saturn's probably the most misunderstood planet of all, he's not really all about challenges and stuff. But he is about discipline and about structure and about understanding your life like through that kind of lens. But also, like just as a little example, like a lot of times if you have Saturn there, it means that a lot of the things that you're going to learn in your life is through relationships. It doesn't have to be romantic relationships. It can be, you know, friendships and any relationship, work relationships. But you'll normally find that if you can get to someone who, let's say you're doing someone's chart who's 55 rather than 25, um, you know, they've had much more relationships, and maybe they've also had different partners, and then you can go like, oh yeah, like I repeated that pattern several times before I realized I didn't want, that's not what I wanted, for example.
Hmm.
So I just think that, if you understand, when I do it, I like to see like, this is the chart, this is the rising sign, this is where the planets are, and then you understand the energy that you're playing with in your life. Because as I'm even doing the chart, I'm going like, this is the high value of having Venus here, this is the low value of having Venus here, and then you go, oh, am I actually reaching for the highest value of that when I'm feeling like that, or am I still reaching for the lowest value of that? And then I feel like if people understand what the high value and what the low value is, then then you can make your own choice, because even though, like you just said before, like, oh, is it all set in stone and stuff, like, it isn't really set in stone at all, really, because we have free will. But if you can understand the energies that are playing out in your life, and like why you feel certain ways about certain things, or why you have certain feelings about certain things, then I think that you really get a very good perspective. You stop trying to be like somebody else. You actually stop comparing yourself to your friend, or someone that you work with, and so you start going like, oh, this is actually who I am. And I find
Hmm.
that's the biggest realization from what I do, that actually makes people wake up. Really, it really wakes them up, because they all of a sudden realize, like, oh, because when they book a reading with me, I don't know who they are. I've never met them in their whole life. Do you know what I mean? Like, so when all of a sudden, like, a lot of times I like doing them online, because at the end I can just like close the lid and they're kind of gone.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, I find that if I do them in person and they come to my house, which I do love doing them in person, don't get me wrong, but
Hmm.
it's like I can't get them at the door, because like they all of a sudden meet someone who's going like, oh my god, you know me better than you understand me better than anybody's ever understood me. So of
Hmm.
course they don't want to leave. They want
Right.
to go deeper and ask more questions and stuff. But it's not, you no most of the time you just spent an hour. I'm not. I normally mine take about 90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what happens. I don't really stop anybody. Like, if you've come for a reading, it's just like I don't go after an hour, for example. Like, no, that's time's up, kind of thing. I can't help it, because I get into it as much as they get into it, kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
So,
I have the same thing with
and
my Ayurveda sessions. I have the same
yeah,
exact thing. It's
it just takes as long as it takes.
exactly, and traditionally it was more organic, and healers, it when it comes to healing, we know that healing takes as long as healing takes. There's no rush to the
Yeah,
healing, and there's also no rush to the learning. So, but then we live in this other system that we have to like integrate the Vedas and the work that we do, and we have to like work inside of this construct of this is a career and a profession, and there's a transaction, and there's an energy exchange, and there's a time window, and then like the rest of your day has to be kind of like organized around that structure. So I hear you though on like it's having that like strict, okay, it's been 1 hour, the clock strikes, and you're like, well, we're not done, and I can't. And just intuitively, it's especially if they're like in the middle of a breakthrough or like a
yeah,
major realization, who are we to like stop that incredible momentum of what is occurring in that moment? It's exactly what we hope for
yeah,
to happen.
yeah. And most of
So
the time, I never look at the time, actually.
right.
Like, unless someone's coming to my house and I know someone else is coming later, that's the only time I've normally, I normally always try to have at least a good hour and a half or so in between there, so that I get a little break as well, and that I can, but I've got extra buffer. But yeah, otherwise when I'm doing them online, I normally just sometimes like shut the lid and go like, "Oh my god, that was like 2 hours," because I look at my clock. I just looked up there because my clock is up there.
Hmm.
But I just think, oh well, But I get the most amazing emails and feedback, and I always send, you know, we do remedies and stuff like that, which we can talk about later as well, like
Hmm.
different things. So I normally send an email going like, well, this is what you need to be mindful of, and then these are some remedies to help if you've got debilitations in your chart where planets are a bit weaker, or exaltations, or or if there's a certain area of your life that you're wanting to particularly focus on at this time, then there's different remedies for that too.
Hmm. I'm
Yeah,
wondering what the best place is to start when it comes to guiding someone to living in accordance with their chart. How do you bring people through all of the houses, or I mean, of course, I'm sure you start with the rising sign, the moon, the nakshatra, the sun sign, but then also the mahadashas and the particular like, um, let's call it like, what is it, like era that they're in, or like main
yeah, time
chapter
period
time
that they're in.
period.
Yeah, Yeah.
and like which planet is most kind of hyper defined in that time, whether it be some of them are short and some of them are longer. um, and I'm sure they also come with like, many times people are coming to astrology because something's going on that they don't understand. And they're really hoping for clarity around how to frame it and how to grasp it, and also how to move through it, and hopefully how to learn from said obstacle or whatever particular thing, whether it be health related, relationship related, career related, um personal, just that, by the way, relationship could be with yourself, like how you view yourself, because everything could seem right on the surface, and then inside for some reason you're just not, something's not feeling quite aligned. So I'm wondering if maybe we should go through the nine planets or the navagrahas, and how each one, you started with Saturn, and I'm really happy that you did, because I also have a Saturn's my Atmakaraka, or the planet that has the highest degrees in the chart,
Right.
which I'm sure you
Interesting.
can, yeah, exactly, it's interesting. Which I'm sure you can illuminate what that means more, because I have, yeah, I have questions just like any other student, and I'm a forever student, and every single teacher has a different way of sharing the knowledge. Just like I still like going to beginner yoga classes, even though I've been doing yoga forever. I love seeing how will you approach talking about Saturn as an Atmakaraka, and how will you approach talking about the other planets, and the karma surrounding each planet. I'm just, it's
Yeah.
fun. It's like we get to nerd
No,
out on this
definitely.
stuff.
Well, I mean, like the sun, is really your ego. It's like who you are. It's like how you are in the world, and moon is more about how emotionally you deal with things in the world as well. And obviously, with the moon as well, we have, you mentioned the nakshatras before, like which are, and I think that's what I really loved about Vedic astrology, for example, is the fact that you don't just say like, oh, my moon is in Pisces. It's like, within Pisces, there's 2.5 nakshatras, like, so you can just dial it down even more to get like a really amazing flavor of like what your moon is. So there can be like, so there's different flavors of Pisces, within your moon. So I think that that's a very beautiful
Nuance
observation that
or
we can make, and a nuance that we can have like in Vedic astrology, which makes it really interesting, because I do full moon posts every month that I started doing like a couple of years ago. And so but I always talk about the nakshatra rather than the actual sign that it's in. But but mainly because I feel like, I always say that it's within this constellation so that people know. But yeah, it's very, I feel that it really helps you understand what you're really supposed to be focusing on in that full moon, rather than just like it's in Pisces, for example.
definitely, it's
And
more
then,
specific.
yeah, it's just so much more specific. And then, Jupiter is the teacher of the chart. He's like all about expansion. And, Mars is the general of the chart. He's about like whoosh, giving you drive and determination of like where you're supposed to be going. And then Venus is the heart. So it's about, how you feel things, your creativity. Um, yeah, like how you look out at the world. And then you also have the shadow planets called Rahu and Ketu, which are, you know, um, I feel that, I really love the mythology. There's like a short version of the mythology that goes out, when the Devas were giving out the immortal nectar so that they could live forever, this dragon stuck into the line, and as he was drinking the immortal nectar, he was like sliced in half, and so the head went to one end of the chart and the tail went to the other. But they were like, "You can't have any of this. You're a dragon." That's why, like, sliced him in half, because he was not a Deva; he was a dragon.
Hmm.
And so the head of the dragon represents expansion into what you're supposed to be doing, and then the tail represents what past life karma you came in to work on in this lifetime. So if you and the tail is K2. So if you work on what you came in to work on, then you can ride the head of the dragon into like full expansion into what you're doing. But if you don't really work on what you came in to work on, or not really doing the spiritual side of your work that you're doing, sometimes you can be chasing something all the time and never feeling satisfied because you're just a head with no body, right? So it's like, it's about really balancing out the Rahu and Ketu, because ultimately they're the same planet,
Mm.
and so it's I do focus a little bit more on Rahu and Ketu, because I feel that just from the amount of readings I've done now, like a lot of times, like it's mainly because people aren't looking at some of the things that they're supposed to be working on. Like, for example, some people get really caught up in their career, but they've got a very spiritual chart that needs to be activated.
Mm.
And they're trying everything else rather than learning to meditate
Mm-hmm.
or going and doing some breath work or going to do something. They're doing everything else. They're going to a psychic. They're like, they want the blue pill.
Mm-hmm.
Give me the blue pill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that seems like it's going to take a lot of work, and I have to do it. I have to do it every day for 20 minutes. It's like, and it's very interesting. But if you see that, like, oh, if you just learn to meditate, or you just do this particular breathwork practice 3 times a week, then you'll be feeling so much different straight away. And I think that's like one of the things that um, has this beautiful frustration for me when they don't do it still, and the ones that do, and you see them thrive.
Mm-hmm.
You watch them go
Transform.
and they go
They
like
totally transform.
transform, and they go like, and then the ones writing you to you going like, oh my god, why wasn't I doing this years ago? And I was like, well, you found it now, it doesn't matter, don't worry about it, you're doing it now. But it's been so interesting. And lately what's been making me probably even more happy is the fact, like, so many more men are coming to have readings and say, like, and a lot of them are actually saying, oh, I also need to tap into my divine feminine. And it seems the
Wow.
most weirdest thing. Sometimes they're really macho guys as well, like, and they probably wouldn't say it to their friends, but they'll come to me and go like, I feel like I need to, sometimes they go like, I'm having trouble in my relationships, and I feel like it's because I listened to a podcast once and they talked about divine feminine, and and I know I'm definitely skewing way too much this way, and I'm not in touch with this part, and so I need to do this. So I thought I'd have a reading first, and can you help me with the other stuff? And then you give them, some different practices to do and things like that as well. And then but sometimes it is just simple spiritual practices that you can just do, and it helps people really connect into themselves. And I feel like if you understand your life from a whole perspective, and then all of a sudden you can zoom out and start looking at the big timeline of your life and see, like, the ebbs and flows of like where you got to and stuff. And like you mentioned before, like, my favorite part of doing a reading is normally at the end. I actually do the dasha system.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, I like to look at the dashas. So the dashas in Vedic astrology are like just certain periods of time where certain planets are sitting over your chart. So I like to think of it like a clock, like hours, minutes, seconds. So like there's like certain planets that sit there for a certain period of time. The other planets like passing around, and then all of a sudden it's time for another one to click in, and then that one clicks in, and the other ones are always like passing. So that's why we're never stagnant, right? We're always like having flavors that are coming through to make us work on different things. And depending on where the planets are in your birth chart, we look at, the cosmos from where they're currently transiting in your life right now, and we go like, oh, this one's passing over this particular planet in your birth chart, so this is the things that you need to be wary of now. So like, for example, we they when you go into Rahu Dasha, that's like 18 years. And what I've really found, like, I also had, when I talked about Party Jeff before, like, I was in Rahu Dasha. But the first part of my
Ah,
Rahu years
that makes
actually was
sense.
like, yeah, the first part of my Rahu, though, the first like 9 years, because it's an 18-year period, was when I was 23. And that was when I went to Hong Kong, and I went to Malaysia, and I went to London. So if you think about that particular time, like, I ended up channeling all of that expansive Rahu energy into my career. Like, I wasn't really going out and drinking and doing stuff because I wasn't like, it just wasn't really around me. So it was just more very career orientated. Whereas once I got to London, that's when Party Jeff was born. Do you know what I mean? Because in
Ah,
London there was like Ministry of Sound, and there
that
was like
also makes
clubbing, and there was
sense.
like, yeah, there was like alcohol and maybe some other things. And so, and I think that uh, that particular time in my life, then all of a sudden that was like the last 9 years of Rahu were kind of like, sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing, as well as expansion in my career at the same time. But it was definitely like that. But I think it's because I was younger. So if you look at people who go through Rahu Dasha when they're older, it normally just is into expansion, but sometimes they're kind of understanding themselves like a lot more, or like finding other things. But it was very interesting when I was able to look back on my chart at certain periods of time. And I remember in the party jet phase when I was like really wanting to do it. I can remember sometimes coming home like at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I used to have this window that used to look out at this like big tree, and I remember standing there looking at this tree as I talked to this tree all the time. And I used to say, and I just like thought something has to change. Like I don't want to do this anymore. Like I want to do it. And it's very interesting because at that stage I didn't have astrology and didn't know anything about anything. But it was interesting because after that I moved to where I am now, like still at the beach, and I changed my whole life where I didn't go out anymore. I started meditating. I started doing that. It was interesting because then I went into Jupiter, which is after that. So I'm still in my last 2 years of Jupiter now, but like Jupiter's like a
Ah.
16-year period. So, it's been about, Jupiter was all about learning. I like studied meditation. I like changed my whole career. I was much more grounded and centered. I also went through the cancer thing like right during that period. But, another thing to mention to people is that there's also like a period sometimes called Sadasati, which is like a seven
Hmm.
and a half year period when Saturn passes over where your natal moon is when you were born. And so, when I was able to look back, that was actually when I went in through Sadasati as well.
Yeah,
Like so,
people need to know that that's something that every human being goes through, that you're not alone,
yeah,
and that it's literally part of this incarnation is that there's going to be this time. And something that I've always kind of warmly referred to with my Jyotish friends, and the ones, especially the ones that have been on the podcast before, is that there isn't a single human being who doesn't have a Saturn, who doesn't have a Rahu, who doesn't have a Ketu, and who doesn't go through a Sati, and who doesn't go through some life altering, life changing, soul crushing, transformative moments. So it's just, for me, when I kind of learned this language of astrology, it gave me it. You know what it does? It just helps you feel so connected to everything in this universe. Um, because we are all connected, and it's a real tangible way for us to talk about, like, as soon as you said sati sati, I'm just thinking about my mom. I'm pretty sure my mom is going through sati sati, and she's going through a real rough sati sati. um and she wasn't prepared for it. She wasn't doing spiritual practices beforehand. And I sent her some mantras that my another Jyotish friend told me to share with her. And she's like, wow, these are really helping me so much. And it's like, this is why this podcast exists too. It's to get this knowledge, to help people through these times, because we're all going to have our turn with it. We're all going to have, and we're not supposed to go through it without this knowledge. We're supposed to have this knowledge, and we're supposed to have the support to understand it and to understand ourselves. And when you mentioned having had Anand and then Tom, your first Vedic meditation teacher, I was just like, this is it. This is it. This is the grace. It's the having the teachers. It's just having
yeah. I think
teachers.
everyone needs to have a teacher.
Hmm.
Everyone needs to have a teacher. You can have a teacher, and then you also kind of almost need to have like a guru. I mean, I don't really like calling those people gurus. I mean,
Yeah,
even though
yeah.
Anand is definitely a guru and stuff like that. Like, do you mean? But it's like I just don't like that word for some reason. Like, do you mean?
Hmm.
Like, but
Hmm. Hmm. And
but
I
definitely
understand
being a
why.
teacher, like, yeah. I mean, for me, it's just like I don't know what it is. So, but it's like very interesting. Where I just feel like everyone needs a teacher in their life. Like, whether it be teachers like us as well, or like even if that's a stepping stone to like help you get somewhere. But you need someone who like can shed some light on where you are and where you're going. And if you hit troubles with something, it's not something that you need to discuss with your friend who actually probably in the same set of consciousness as you. You need someone who, and I'm not saying that we're better, just that we've like, for example, I've coached and trained and taught like thousands of people now that I've probably heard every story and like have seen lots of different perspectives, and also follow the journey because I'm very in touch with like a lot of my students and people that come into my life that I'm really interested in like finding out how they're going. And I often just text people when they pop into my awareness. I'll go like, hey, I just do it. Like, how are you going? Like, so it's really interesting like to do that. And I just think that and it's very interesting as well like with Sadasati is that I like to think of it in a way where it's almost like one book of your life is like closing and then there's like a new book opening, because a lot of times it's transitioning you into like a new version of yourself, like the new high grade version of like the the one that has to take all the experiences of the past and where you're up to at that particular point, because everyone experiences it at different times in their life. Um, so when you understand like what that is, and that's like, oh, okay, I've got to take all the learnings that I've got there and not take them into this period actually, because there's going to be new learnings in this period. But it's about, making sure that you're stable and stuff. And interestingly, a lot of people, like probably 90% of the readings that I end up doing, you're either at the beginning of Saraswati, in the peak of Saraswati, or you're just coming out of it. Most people are searching for something around that time because it's been years of like, maybe you're going and seeing a psychic, or like going and seeing like different
Or a
things like that where you
therapist.
realize. Or a therapist,
Yeah.
yeah, for
I mean,
example. I mean, I
that's,
won't say therapist because in Australia, like we don't really have therapists like you
oh,
guys have therapists,
oh,
but
I didn't know
but it could be
that.
a therapist. I mean, we kind of do, but it's not like, I feel like everyone in America, like everyone has a therapist,
Yeah.
whereas like we just don't really have that. Or if you do actually kind of have that here, it's not something you talk about.
Hmm.
Let's put it that way,
It used
you
to be
know?
like that in the US where it was more rare. It was
Right.
like, oh, there must be something real wrong with that person if they have to go to a therapist. Now it's like, if you go to a therapist, wow, good on you for like,
Yeah.
you're going to be a much easier person to be in a relationship with. You're going to be a much easier person to work with, communicate with. When it's more now. It's seen as like a proactive, like self growth investment, and I think same thing with the growing popularity of Ayurveda and working with an Ayurvedic
Mm,
practitioner. um, yeah, I think, and often, what we do is there's healing and then there's teaching, and it has to be both. And I've been
yeah.
like you follow people's journeys. You want everyone to get what they needed from you, and you also want to take note of ways that you can improve. So when you mentioned like some people aren't as compliant with like the recommendations, like the practices that you give them, the remedies, they call them remedies in Jyotish. Like if there's a debilitation in the moon debilitation is a big one. That's the mind. So, or Venus.
And it's also mother, actually. A lot of times if you've got like, problems with your mother,
Oh yeah,
it's
mhm.
moon, because moon's in normally moon gets debilitated in
Mhm.
Scorpio. So if your moon's in Scorpio, you know, actually, but the thing is, even though it means you have a lot
My
of,
moon is in Scorpio, Jeff.
is
It
it?
is. It is.
But
How did
sometimes
you
it's
know?
actually
No, just kidding.
that it. But the thing is, it's either like it can come up, it show up in multiple ways. It can either be a flawed relationship with the mother, where the mother's like, you just have this relationship that's really hard, but actually there's a lot of lessons to that. But normally, actually, you end up finding that over time, she's the one who ends up becoming your first guru. She becomes your first teacher. She actually
100%.
taught you um, the most, even though it might have been rocky at the beginning because you might not have understood her. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it's like it can be.
I concur.
That's what I definitely find. That mother actually ends up becoming, because a lot of times if you've got to look at what past life karma you've brought through, like I really love looking at that particular part, because you can see karmically to go like, okay, like let's look at what's aspecting all of that as well, and like let's see like where K2 is, because it is the past life karma planet too. So it's like, you start looking at that kind of stuff, and then you start going like, oh, this isn't, you've got to stop looking at everything in the timeline of like this lifetime. Sometimes we've
It's
actually
all in
got to zoom out
context.
more
Yes.
and look at the bigger timeline, because you've obviously brought something through from a previous lifetime together, because we kind of do travel in soul groups, and like, with like to work through whatever we've got to work through. And I think that, it's very important to look at it. If you can start zooming out and looking at it like that, like, I think that's really important too. I've got a
100%.
really great story of a past life thing. Can I just tell you that for a second?
Yes, but I do want to nuance this.
Sorry, you go
I
first.
want to
Go.
nuance I mentioned my moon is in Scorpio, Anuradha Nakshatra. And I feel like that's
Right.
important because again, big difference between the three nakshatras that are Scorpio moon. Like they're all really different.
Yeah, they are.
So yeah, Anuradha is mine. I just wanted to share that one with
Nice.
you. With you. Yeah.
Thank you. What one thing I found interesting was, like, I did a reading for a lady like a couple of months ago now, and she ended up having Ketu and Rahu, and like Ketu was in the house of the mother and Rahu was in the house of the father. But you could just see that through the dasha system, which I was talking about before, how like different planets are, different periods of time of coming through your life. Um, I don't know why. I think sometimes because I was a bit psychic when I was younger, and I feel that since I've been doing this, it's just kicked it back in big time again. Sometimes, like you can see it, but it's also just even looking at that dasha system really helps you to see things. And I was like, oh, it looks like your dad left when you were probably about 2. And then she's like, yeah, he did. Like, he left us. And I was like, oh, but he's probably coming back like around now. You're going through this actual other Rahu, Jupiter Rahu period. Like, it's a possibility that, like, is he still around? Like, because it looks like he's still around. She's like, oh, he's been trying to, like, come and see. Like, he's never met his grandkids. Like, I don't want anything to do with him. Like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, but how did you think that I knew that? And she's like, how did you know that? And I was like, yeah, because in here, he's actually, because she also had moon. No, she also had sun in the house of the mother, which was like, sun can also represent father in astrology as well. So then I was like, oh no, your mother was actually supposed to play both roles in your life. She was
Mm.
supposed to be your mother and your father. And that your father's actual dharma was really just to birth you. And then after 2, like that
Ooh.
was it. Like he wasn't supposed to be there anymore. The mother was supposed to be the one who actually raised you. I said, but like you do have this window now where I just was wanting to find out whether he was still alive or not, like whether or not he was there, just because I don't know. For some reason, I had a feeling that like because she was in this Jupiter Rahu period, going like, oh, like yeah, maybe he might be trying to come back around. And she's like, no, he has been trying, and I just don't want anything to do with him. And then I ended up talking to her about how our parents are our first relationship in our life, and that if it's very important, it's the one thing I'll probably have to explain the most when I'm doing readings too, especially when you see so many people that have problems with their relationship with their parents or one of
Mm.
their parents,
Mm.
where you have to understand that, like, it's not about being best friends with them or about, you know, going and having coffee and singing kumbaya with them. It's actually about just understanding that they were in their state of consciousness and they were doing whatever they were doing at that particular time. And we just have to see them with love and understanding, and understand that we may be in a high state of consciousness. So we can see them and we just think that, oh, because they're our parents or they're older, that they should know better. But actually, that's not always the case. And so, you know, that reading for that girl that I was doing, we ended up talking for, because I had taught her to meditate previously as well. So we went through a whole lot of Vedic knowledge in relation to that whole thing. We unpacked it basically.
Oh,
And
amazing.
I ended up getting an email like 4 days later from her mother. So her mother got my email address and she said to me, I was really upset with, I had to talk to you because I wanted to write to you because I was very upset because I was looking after the kids while you were doing the reading. She said it was going to be like an hour and a half and it ended up being like 3 hours, and I had to end up canceling an appointment that I had, and I was very upset. She said, but the girl who walked out of that room and the girl who went into that room and the girl who walked out was a completely different person. She said she walked out of the room and she said, call dad and invite him over for dinner tonight. And
Amazing.
she said, like, I just wanted to thank you for putting my family back together because I've still had a relationship with my ex-husband. She said, and all he's wanted is to actually meet his grandchildren and do that stuff. And she said, I don't know what you said to her, and I didn't even ask her what you said to her. But all I wanted to say is that whatever you said, I just wanted to thank you because I want to thank you for putting our family back together. And, it gives me goosebumps even still
Gives
thinking
me
about it now.
goosebumps too.
And I think that, that's what I really love about this technology is the fact that you can really look at all of it. And if you can really zoom out and you've got someone who really wants to understand and will listen to what you're saying rather than going like, no, I'm not like having anything to do with him. She could easily have been that person, but didn't, was actually asking a lot of questions because I do coaching and stuff too. Obviously that all
Hmm.
just comes as part of the puzzle, but it's
Hmm.
like, the whole thing is about, how do you unpack it in a way to make people understand it? I feel that one of my gifts, like I think one of a nun's gifts as well, actually, is actually being able to take complex knowledge and being able to break it down into the most simplest forms. And I kind of use story form to kind of do that by using examples of different things. But, I feel like if you can look at, you know, things like that, you can definitely see how it can have this beautiful knock-on effect by understanding like, oh, he left when you were 2 and your mother was supposed to play both roles in your life. And if you all of a sudden like have this whole understanding, like No, when you before you were born, you chose your parents and you chose the time that you were being born because you wanted to experience certain things in this lifetime, and that was actually part of it. You know, it's not about dismissing it because you wanted it to be a different way. Why do you want it to be a different way? Are you comparing it to somebody else?
It's a very
You know,
empowering framework, very empowering to and also probably mind-boggling for some people who would think, why would I ever choose these people, right?
exactly.
For
I
list
get that
for
question.
listeners. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. I had that thought for many years in my childhood of like, this couldn't this doesn't seem right. Like, this doesn't seem like the right fit or something. Like, I'm so different. I often felt very, very different from my family. Like, didn't think the same way, didn't value the same things. Where did I come from? Maybe I was switched at birth. Having these types of thought. Um, and then as you go on this path, you just realize, wow, it was exactly how it needed to be. And I just related to so many things you were just saying about, the sun and the moon, big, big places to look in a person's chart. We're
Yeah,
obviously, our sense of time is completely dependent on the placement of the sun and the moon. Everything is dependent on those two things, of it
yeah.
creates the structure of our life here on this planet. So, when we're really young, our parents are the moon and the sun to us, like they're God.
That's
Um,
right.
and yeah, and it does, like, our past does shape all the future relationships that we have, and the feminine and masculine within ourselves as well. So if we had a
Well, also
mom that
because
was
the
playing
relation,
both,
yeah, yeah,
then we're like, oh, I don't need a man. Then you like push, you might be finding yourself subconsciously pushing that divine masculine away because you don't think you're
mm.
supposed to like all these types of narratives that can kind of just
Well, I
come by
think that
default.
what I've really seen is that your relationship with your parents affects every relationship in your life because they're the first relationship that you
Hmm.
have,
Hmm.
and that's what I said as well. Like you don't have to be best friends with them or whatever, but you just have to have an understanding of like where they were at and understanding that, and think about them with love and understanding. That's it. You don't have to even see them or speak to them. Do you know what I mean? But it's about
Hmm. Hmm.
you have to see them with love and understand that they were the ones who birthed you into this existence, and even just for that by itself, you should have a lot of gratitude because
Baseline
you wouldn't be sitting
gratitude.
here now without them. That's it. That's all
Hmm.
you have to have because that actually energetically will make things easier in all relationships in your life.
Within you, it really comes down to that energy that's living inside of you, creating
Yeah.
harmony for yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. The one planet I don't think you covered yet was Venus, and I'm curious,
Oh, Venus.
selfishly curious, and I'm gonna maybe toss in on one personal question, maybe, 'cause since
Yeah.
I'm in my Venus.
You're in a Venus
So
Venus. Interesting.
yeah, I just started my Venus Mahadasha September 2023, and I'm in Venus. I don't know until uh, for like a hot
20 years of Venus.
yes, but the
Yeah.
like the Venus, like, dasha, like the Venus subchapter of the Mahadasha. I'm in
Yeah.
that. I think it's what, like 2.5 years of Venus or something, or 3 years, and then you go to like Venus Rahu. I don't know.
I
But
can tell
then,
you in one
oh
second.
yeah, and then also my Venus is exalted in my ni-
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
in my ninth house, but I have a combust Venus. So Venus is a very prominent planet in my existence for that reason. It's exalted. She's happy in Pisces, but she's very close to the sun. So the sun wants to how
So
I've
just burning her up.
exactly I've heard it articulated as like the sun kind of wants Venus to himself instead of letting Venus like
Yeah.
be all in her glory. He kind of is like absorbing the shine a bit. Um, which I thought was
I feel like
interesting.
that normally happens a lot, especially at the beginning of your life in terms of like understanding Venus with Sun. I feel like as people get older, more so than with their dasha, but if your Venus is with Sun, then a lot of times you struggle with intimacy or expressing how you're really feeling about something, whatever, because the actual Venus energy is burning. It's getting burnt up by the sun, especially if your degrees are quite close as well. Like if they're further apart, it makes it easier. But if they're quite close, then it's like it can definitely be that. So the Venetian side of your life can be definitely hampered, I suppose is the word,
Yes.
where where you can just feel that you struggle even looking for love or feeling loved, or it was
Yes.
even just interesting that you said before, like, oh, I thought that maybe I was born into the wrong family or I was switched at birth, like, so it's
Yes.
like
Yes.
that particular thing as well. Like, if you think about that too, it is that because maybe even though you would have been loved for sure, that there's like you didn't feel it in the way that you wanted to feel
Did
it. Do you
not
know what I mean?
feel
Like,
it.
so,
No.
and that's the reason why as well, a lot of times that, when Sun and Venus are together, it's definitely like a harder placement. But I normally find that, like, over periods of time, especially over time, that kind of, because you then go through experiences which help you understand love a lot more.
Yes.
And then, the journey through time is a lot easier. But I also find in Venus Dasha period, especially with people, that before you get into Venus Dasha, a lot of times you can have like a big run up to something that you're doing or something that you're building or whatever. Then you get into Venus, and sometimes it can be hard to continue to build something, because Venus, I feel like, is the sustainer. Like it wants to. During a 20-year Venus period, you're supposed to be enjoying life and doing that stuff. Not everyone gets a Venus Dasha, so it's like you've got a Venus Dasha. It's just like not everyone gets a Jupiter Dasha. Or well, they get it, but they're like 75, so they
Right.
can't, experience it the way that you would be experiencing it, for example. So I feel that, when you get given it as well, it's about how do I tap into my creativity? Like, am I doing like Venetian things that are going to start doing that? So it could be just doing things like doodling and drawing, or, there was a really good book called The Artist's Way. Like
Oh
it
yeah.
was
The artist's
ages
way.
ago. Like I think, I think that's like a really beautiful thing to do. And I think that, that kind of like, with the Venetian side as well, it is about how do you tap into like heart centered awareness? How are you accessing it? What house is your Venus in?
Ninth.
In the ninth
Mm-hmm.
house, yeah. So like that's like a much more spiritual house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ninth house is like the house of the guru and stuff. So it's like how do you incorporate your spirituality and your spiritual practice like into your Venetian activities?
Mm-hmm.
Because Venus isn't just about creativity and stuff like that. It's about maybe you've got a creative way of looking at a really complex problem. You could be a data analysis, but you've got a very a very elegant way of like looking at, of breaking down a problem. It's like things like that as well. It's like how does that like all interweave as well? And I think that with Venus Dasha as well, you need to be a lot more gentle on yourself too. I think that Venus Dasha and Moon Dasha are the two Dashas where people get, just from my experience of like, doing a lot of readings, that sometimes people are trying to change something or really like push something because like I want this, and a lot of times it doesn't happen that quickly. It has to be elegantly done because it needs to be aligned, so
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't like pushing, or like if you're in Mars, for example, it'd be different because Mars is the general, he's the driver, he's like, yeah, I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to do that. Whereas I find as well, like people in Moon Dasha, for example, because you've just come out of Sun, so Sun's 7 years, and then
Mm-hmm.
Moon is 10 years after Sun.
And
But a
I
lot of
just got
times
out of
people are like,
K2, and
yes, right.
K2 just leveled me, like I mean, just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
humbled me to the nth of the world, and in a beautiful way. It was beautiful. It was absolutely stunning, and but I still feel like I'm like kind of. It's so interesting going from K2 to Venus. Like that jump is
Mm.
so huge.
When did you
It
go into
just
Venus? How
September
long have you
20.
been?
I've been in Venus for like a year and a half,
Right, okay. So yeah, it's like about 3 years.
almost.
So you're halfway through
Yeah,
the
halfway through
Venus
Venus,
part.
Venus. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah, nice.
ride.
And that's the whole thing. And you've transitioned into like, a whole new period of your life. I mean, that's what things, when I do the dasha, I kind of do it for my own pleasure. For example, like whenever I'm doing a reading at the end, I just like, because on the phone you can see the different periods of time where the
Mhm.
dashas kind of are.
Mhm.
I can I was like going like, oh, what happened in like 1981 when you were 25? Do you know what I mean? Like, and what happened then in like, then I'll just fast forward like the Dasha periods. And I go, what happened there? Then I'll go like, oh, that's when I lost my job, or that's when I got married and had my first child, or that's where I got divorced. That's when and it's very interesting to see that when these Dashas come in, it changes people's whole life because, or it pushes them into something else. Like, and I think if you understand that as well, like people normally get really surprised that I can pinpoint dates, but it's like so easy because it's just written on there. Yeah, I can see what the dates are, but actually they have so much meaning for people because,
It's
if we
accurate.
understand that, oh, it's so accurate. And the thing is, if we can understand that and we can see that too, it's like I said before, we actually just stop worrying about all the things that we can't control. And if you understand the energies that are at play, and like, because wherever the planet is in that particular chart, in whichever house and whichever sign, when you go into that dasha, it lights up that house. So then you need to work out, well, what house is that in? Because that's actually what I'm working on for the next 16 years or 10 years, or that's going to be the main flavor. And so, I think that, that's like a very big thing. I find people in Moon Dasha like very sometimes struggle. If you're in Moon Dasha and you become a mom or you become a parent, it's great
Mm.
because that's what you're supposed to do because Moon represents mother and all that stuff as well. But sometimes if people are trying to, a lot of times, like if you're not in any of those periods and you're in Moon Dasha, people struggle because they're like, oh, I'm trying to do this, but then you're really like guided by the waxing and waning of the moon, where you feel like, yes, I'm going to do that. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, yes, I'm going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that
And
anymore.
how
Like you can't, like you're watery. You're so like, all over the shop. And then you come out and you're in Mars and you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Like, bang.
and how about
But
if
it's
you're
10 years. It's a
and
10-year thing.
especially if you're like me, Cancer rising, Cancer's ruled by the moon. So that's
Mm,
already very much changing with the cycles of the moon. So moon on moon on
mm.
moon. Sometimes it's just so interesting when you know these nuances of like what planet does your rising sign rule and then how that plays in too, you know?
Yeah.
And all the transits, like there's just so many layers to this. It's not
Yeah,
just,
I think that's why it's really good to do like yearly readings. I
yes.
think that every person should have, I do have quite a lot of clients that go every January. I mean, I prepared 10 charts yesterday, because I
Wow.
normally find like January for me is like, I probably do 10 a week easily,
Wow.
so it's, and then now what's happening is that because obviously it's been helping either the husband or the wife or the partner, I now all of a sudden get, now it's kind of turned into being, some of them that I've been doing for a few years have been like, lately I've been doing like the husbands and the wives like
Together. Oh,
separately, but
separate.
then
A
we also
joint
do one that's
session.
together to go, well, how do we actually use our energies like
How do the
together, because then you
blueprints
can
work
look at,
together? Yeah.
yeah, how do we do that? So we'll do like, I'll do them separate, and then sometimes they like to sit in on each other's reading, which I really find interesting. Like the first time it happened, I was like, do you really want to listen to each other's reading? Because like, if you're going to talk about some things that like, this is what you need to be working on, or this is what you need to be, whatever. And sometimes you see the other person going like, yeah, it's very interesting to go like, do you want them to know that? But then, yeah, I think it can be. I mean, look, I've never heard about it being going the other way. It's only happened maybe 3 times that I've had them sit in on each other's, listening to each other's reading, and then we do the combined one. But I've looked at kids' charts as well. Like I love like there's mums who I've had recently quite a few mums who come to me about going like, oh, my child's being diagnosed with ADHD, for example, and the child might only be 10 or 11, but they've gone like, I don't know why, but I feel like I want to, can you look at that child's chart and tell me, you know, I've got a feeling that I shouldn't be medicating that child. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something about them that's actually not like, it just seems like a blanket diagnosis. Yeah, I felt like this blanket diagnosis, and they go, could you just look at their chart for me and tell me? And then you can see in their chart, for example, that they might be born in a Rahu period, which is finishing when they're 11. And you're going like, a lot of times say like, you know what? Yeah, just hold on. Like they're going to come out once they get through to that next period, they're going to be a different child. They will be really different. And I said, and the reason why they chose you to be their parent is because you've just contacted me to find out this information rather than giving them the pill. I said, because like when you're medicating a kid that's like that young, I mean, some people need to have it because they do actually have ADHD, but I think that there's also like some that don't. It's like that was just an example. So it's not like I've got anything against ADHD, but I do breathwork for ADHD, and I do lots of different stuff. There's lots of different things you can do rather than just a one size fits all kind of thing. And I feel that, if you know that, and you know what, I've had people contact me afterwards to go like, oh my God, you were right. They're like so much better now. Like, I realized that I had to make some adjustments with them. And it might even be like, I had to even move them from their friendship group that they had, or like I actually changed schools so that they're in a much more, you know, a Montessori type school or one of those types of schools that's like much more like creative because they weren't in that environment. But this environment, they're thriving, like it was that there as well, like where we just like took in multiple factors. But like, yeah, we don't need to, you know, they're not on anything still. Like they're fine, and they seem to be getting better as they're aging and developing.
So that's really interesting to use it for parenting, astrology for parenting. And then I was wondering if maybe a good place, like a good last note,
Yeah,
might be because navigating life with your chart, it's a big map, it's a very detailed map. Um, Obviously, working with an astrologer is really important to do this, but I'm wondering if we can maybe give some insight into working with planetary transits or like specific meditation techniques um, per each, like either dasha or like, so for example, I'm just going to volunteer my chart because I it's the easiest thing to do because I probably know my chart better than anyone else's chart. And by the way, I highly recommend each person study their own chart and learn how to look at their chart. I plan to continually, study my own chart so that I can prepare for those life, those big life moments, before they happen.
yeah,
You kind of have a sense of what's going to come. Um, but yeah. Okay, so I'm in Venus, and then I know that right now the transit though that's going over my Venus is Rahu, which is a difficult one. And I know that because I have a lot of Jyotish friends who are like, ooh, uh-oh, it's like, great. I thought Venus. So like I had I was so excited, Geoff, like when I was get it finally like on the tail end, no pun intended, of my K2. Um, I was so ready to be done with K2. Like I love K2. Thank you, K2. But like also by the end, you're like fully cooked and you're like, thank you. Thank God I survived it, because it does change your life a lot. K2 is the planet of detachment. So like not many things stick during that time.
yeah.
It's not a sticky time. It's like a purification time. So I was so excited. I was like so stoked to get into my Venus, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be like romantic, and I can finally. I'm like such a romantic, and I love love, and I just want to get married, and like I want the love story, and yada yada, and like. My Venus so far, I know I'm only a year and a half in. We've got a long way to go. I'm not going to say anything like, overarching about Venus or particularly mine, but I kind of was noticing it's like a little bit rough out here in these waters, and I was kind of expecting to have like a really like just imagine like like you were, let's just say like you were like floating on a raft in the middle of the ocean, and then all of a sudden you think you're like getting on a boat, like a nice boat, like maybe not a yacht, but like a nice boat, at least you won't be wet anymore and you don't have to like paddle with your arms. um and then all of a sudden you're kind of like, this water though, I don't know, it kind of feels like there's some holes in my boat. And then you're like, this is kind of weird. And then you find out Rahu's transiting, and then you're like, wait, what? You know what I mean? Like, you're like, no. So it's really funny that, like, it's not always as simple as, oh, you enter a time period of a planet that you think
Yeah,
is,
that's why I said it was hours, minutes, seconds. If you think of it
yes,
like hours, minutes, seconds,
yes.
like Venus will be there, and then like Rahu's passing around, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn, and then they all
Hmm.
like have a little go at passing through. But every single time one passes through, it's about highlighting something that you're supposed to work on at the same time, like with the Venus influence.
Hmm. Yes, and
Yes.
because I am not yet an astrologer, but I I have knowledge of astrology and how important it is and how it can give us these insights, I did inquire and I was like, oh, wow, okay. Rahu's going to be like a little rough. But then you have an idea at least of when Rahu finishes the transit. So like Rahu will transit and then Saturn begins the transit and Saturn will have its
Mm.
own, and I don't know. I just think this knowledge is very empowering. It gives us a sense of um like it really helps us understand what it is that the challenge or whatever is whatever we're having like resistance to at any given moment of our lives, what like that resistance is pointing to something, and it's pointing to something that ultimately is our growth, like our spiritual growth, our strengthening, refining what it is we're really here to do and experience and become. So it's a really beautiful way to, I don't want to say like fast track your spiritual development, but certainly uh give
It's
com
understanding where to go.
mm, yes.
Yeah.
It's a guide, and having an
Yeah.
astrologer is so important. I've
Yeah, I think everyone needs one.
do you
Like,
have one?
yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, obviously I have a Nand anyway
Oh,
if I
right.
really need it because I'm like very lucky that I have a good relationship with him that I bring him to Australia, on tour and stuff like that as well. So a lot of times when we get to the end of the tour, a lot of times he goes, "Do you have any questions?" And I go like, "Yeah, what should I be worried about now?" Or,
Amazing.
I think as well, like I've got some other friends actually who are astrologers where we've studied together and stuff like that as well, where we've like well, we'll often just look at each other's chart because sometimes, like, it's actually not always good to look at your own because you're looking at it from like a biased kind of
Totally.
perspective as well.
Yes.
It's really interesting. Like, I'll even tell you a story about that because I had, yes, last year, like, K2 was transiting my fourth house of home,
Mm.
and I'd seen that, like, I love where I live and I've been here for 14 years and I don't ever want it to change, and but she's going like, "Oh, you're going to be moving, or like something's changing, like in your home." And I was like, "Don't say that." And I remember like seeing it in my own chart, but I was always like, "Yeah, that's not for me. That's like somebody else,
Hmm.
And but we were at the Bondi markets, funnily enough, like, and she ended up seeing that, going like, "Oh, look at that! Like, this is what's going on in your thing." And I was like, "No, we're not. Like, I'm not even concentrating on that." Doing that. But the funny thing was, like, it didn't really change anything, but I definitely had like a thing happen with my home, like where my landlord was like moving into a nursing home, and like, so there's been definitely changes, but no, like, haven't got kicked out, thank God. But but if he passes away, it's highly possible that they'll just sell, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
the whole building. He owns the whole building.
Wow.
So, it's just things like that as well. Whereas, like, whereas if you've got someone else, see, I looked at it, I kind of
You
saw that, and I
dismissed it.
chose to ignore that
Right.
part of it.
Right.
Whereas she saw it and was going like, "Oh, this is what's going to go on now." And actually, it was really funny because I told her, I messaged her at the time saying like, "Hey, I think you jinxed me, like, by you saying that. Um, you better get your spare room ready because if I get kicked out, I'm moving
Right.
in."
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's so true. Selective attention. I mean, it's really hard being your own. I mean, for me, I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I also need like it's really nice actually having teachers for myself, even though it's much easier giving this to other people in this role. It's easier doing it for others,
Yes,
and
yes,
many of us healers are wounded healers, so we also there are certain blind spots, there are certain places we can't reach that we do need, and I love having fellow practitioners and teachers on because we can relate to each other, and it's just yeah, not many people can. It's like a very
yeah.
kind of like a short.
I also just like doing. I mean, I haven't done it in the last year, although I've been really thinking about it again lately. I've been trying to find someone that I want to do it with, but like sometimes I follow different astrologers on Instagram and things like that as well. I might find someone on YouTube or things like that too, who I like. Where I normally what I do is I will. During COVID, I did it quite a bit actually, maybe because I was bored and we were locked
Yeah, plenty of
down.
time.
yeah, I ended up like just going and booking in readings with multiple astrologers, like not back to back, but like, within a couple of months of each other kind of thing. Um, but mainly because I wanted to see how they actually did their readings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, oh, what
Yeah,
do you do when you do the reading? What do you look at? Like, is there
exactly.
something that I could be doing that's
Yes.
like whatever? So I normally would do it like that, but it's more out of like an interest as well. And then it's also just good to get like someone else's perspective on your chart that you never had look at it before. That's why yeah, that's good too. Like even just as an astrologer, like it's been good to do that because they sometimes I've seen like it might be just one little tiny thing that they do, and I think like, oh, I really liked that. That was very beneficial for me, and then I just incorporate it into mine
It's
now.
so
You
true.
know?
It's so true.
Yeah, yeah,
Same with yoga.
yeah. So it's always about learning. Yeah,
Hmm. Same with yoga classes. Sometimes I'm
yeah,
like, wow, I really, there might be like one cue in that whole class that I like, that changed the way that I did that pose for the rest of my life, you know?
hmm,
And I'm like, there was one at Sattva that was like, strong spine, soft heart. It stuck with me. It's a very sticky
yeah,
cue that's like, huh, that's a really beautiful, simplified, profound statement, you know? It's
yeah.
packed with a lot of meaning, and it's just, yeah, if you can find people who have those little nuggets, slowly you kind of build that within yourself of like, oh, and then it becomes part of your language and your toolkit. And um but to come back to the question of, no, no,
Sorry,
no, 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 it's
sorry. Yeah,
okay. This
yeah.
this the, I love the organic nature of podcasts and conversations, because that's really, at the end of the day, the delivery method of a podcast. It's allowing this complex information to get through, um, in a way that's very relatable, and I think it's important to keep it unscripted. But at the same time, I want to give people perhaps something practical as a takeaway of like, maybe examples of remedies that you give, or meditation techniques that you give, tied to certain, like, and we don't have to go through every single planet, but like somewhat like the ones that are kind of notorious for causing upheaval in a person's life. Like you mentioned, sati sati, the Saturn return for the folks that are like between the ages of 27 and 30, like 30-ish, like
30.
30.
Yeah, yeah,
They're going through a major transformation in
yeah.
that
Saturn
time.
returns. Everyone has Saturn
Yeah.
returns from like 27, 28, 29, 30 kind of
So
thing.
maybe we
Yeah.
give like some love to those people going through that. And then if we wanted to do one for Rahu and one for K2, maybe those three.
Hmm. Rahu and K2, I normally struggle to like give things like that are just
I
like this because
know
I
they're
would
just over
find
art.
for me I would give them like a japa practice. Like japa is like a repetitive mantra, and a lot of times you have to do both of them together.
Uh,
Although if you don't have a meditation practice, I won't actually even give you a japa practice. So japa is like, you might have to say a certain mantra 16,000 times over 40 days, for example. Like and so it's working out like how many rounds of a mala. Like I've got a small mala on right now.
mhm,
These malas have like 108 beads in them.
mhm,
So you work like, oh, how many times do I need to go around, to be able to make it to 16,000 within 40 days? You can do it before 40 days, but not after. So it's like a tapas. Tapas means like penance, or, you basically set an intention of something that you want, and then, or you really just bringing in the highest value energy of that planet. So you want to be able to, you're calling in the highest value energy by chanting the name of the planet. So, for example, with Jupiter, it's Brahaspati
mm.
is the name of Jupiter in Sanskrit. So we use like Om Gram 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 Brahaspatiya Namaha. That's the Jupiter japa
What's
practice.
one for
But you would say
Venus?
that Om Shran Shrin Shran Shukriya Namaha, because Shukra
Oh
is
yeah.
Venus in
Hmm.
Sanskrit. So,
Hmm.
so um, so it's like that. They're just like these beautiful mantras that you do, and basically mantras are vehicles of Shakti, right?
Hmm.
So it's energy that's spiraling upwards. So it's like, whenever you put these mantras inside your mind, or while you're chanting them all the time, then actually when we have 60,000 thoughts of the same thoughts that we had yesterday, and then what that's doing is like all of a sudden you've got this mantra going through your head, which actually causes the pattern interrupt, which actually starts breaking the cycle of like whatever you may be experiencing like that particular time. So it's actually starting to like, almost like recalibrate your mind into like a new way of thinking. Or it's just, if you are in a repetitive thinking of something negative, for example, then it actually also, there's a mantra there, like bang, it breaks the pattern,
Mm-hmm.
because it's energy, you're moving upwards rather than moving down. And so I really like doing breath work. So I've really found that, like, anyone that doesn't have a meditation practice, I actually do have a YouTube channel that has like a whole lot of breathwork practices on it. So if anyone wants to, they're all free. You can just go and do them whenever you want.
Amazing.
Um, but for example, like for Venus, I do have one, because a lot of times if people are in Venus, one question that I do ask people is like, do you love yourself? Like, do you have self love? You know? So I think that, and it's very interesting when you ask people that question,
Mm.
um, the answers that you get, because it's very interesting, actually. It's definitely a very interesting question to ask somebody. Some people find it very confronting
Mm.
that I would actually ask a question like that. I go like, do you love yourself? I think because it comes out of like, I've just told them like a whole lot of stuff about everything, and then all of a sudden, like, it's almost like you go in for the jugular, ask something like really personal. But it's very interesting to see how people respond to that. And there's people that say, no, I don't. Or people that really have to think about it for a long time and go like, I actually don't know.
My
And
immediate
I
thing,
think
just
that,
because I know you were asking me since I'm in Venus, I'm just going to give you the short, which is like definitely, for sure. I
yeah,
definitely do.
good.
And I'm glad you
Yeah,
asked that.
good.
That's a really beautiful, important question.
Yeah, I think it's very important because it actually all starts with self. So if you're in a Venus period, or even in any period actually, and you don't love yourself, like, we need to start there.
Yes.
And I have this beautiful practice that is on the YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to do it, you're all welcome to go there and do it. It's called like a self-love practice. Actually, it goes for 20 minutes, and you basically commit to doing it for 7 days. You can do 7 days, 14 days, or 21 days. All the instructions are written in the description anyway. But what I want you to do is, like, you have like a pen and paper sitting beside you when you do the practice. So it's basically a particular breathwork sequence that puts you into a state. And then there's like a guided meditation at the end of it, which really takes you into your heart. And it's a very heart centered thing. And then what I want you to do is, as soon as you come out of that practice, I want you to write down the first thing that comes up, because it's basically designed to like bring things up. So sometimes if you can't even write a sentence, just write down the words that are coming up, just mud map it. And then you normally find that by the time you get to like day 7, that you can write full pages or sentences where you'll all of a sudden, and then you understand, like, I found that what it does is it shows you where your blockage is. So if you aren't sure if you have self-love, or you think that you don't, and whatever, then a lot of times it definitely is something that will bring up. Some people say like, I cried for like, half an hour after I did that practice. I was like writing, but I was crying at the same time, because it actually shifts something. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's designed to, sometimes, if you've been pushing something down, especially self-love, or you've been hiding it, or you're just not really sure, when you all of a sudden start to access that again, it's like a flood of emotion like starts coming through the body, because, like, it is doing that. So I find, for me, like, that's definitely one practice that is probably the most played thing on my YouTube channel as well. It's probably the one that I even get people who obviously randomly find that on the channel.
Mm.
I'll get the most messages about how it actually really helped them a lot. So I would do that there. Like, for example, if your son was like not, if your son was weak, I would say to you, go and offer water to the sun. I think that, offering water 3 times to the sun, like facing the sun when it's rising, but even if the sun's already risen, it doesn't matter, because I don't want to give people excuses to not do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, even if it's 10 o'clock in the morning and that's when you've got time because you've got kids that you have to get to school, etc. Like, just walk down to some water, or stand at the kitchen sink if you can see the sun, and just like offer water, and like, offer 3 times, and then sprinkle a little bit over your head at the end, just so you can take like a little blessing as well, because the
Mm.
sun, is giving us life. If we didn't have the sun, we wouldn't even be alive right now. We would just be living in darkness, and we wouldn't actually be here. So,
Mm-hmm.
having gratitude for the sun is good. And then if they really love doing that, then I take it one step further, where I also have another video on my YouTube channel, which is about Gayatri Mantra. So Gayatri is the prayer to the sun. I've got all the words in there. I've got the explanation of what it is, like, plus, recordings of like how you can actually sing Gayatri Mantra. So, Gayatri Mantra is this beautiful prayer to the sun. And if you learn that there, you can actually be offering water while you're singing Gayatri Mantra. And if you do have a meditation practice, it's really beautiful to do Gayatri Mantra 6 times at the end, because you're basically invoking light into each chakra point, which I really love about that.
Mm.
And then, if you have a debilitated moon, for example, so for you, it would be the perfect example of today. Um, it would be like, whenever you see the moon, just outside, just putting your hand on your heart and just like acknowledging the moon. And the name for the moon in Sanskrit is Chandra, right? Is the Sanskrit name for moon. So when you use the mantric name of the planet, it's like calling in that vibration, because you're actually using the mantra name of the planet. So Chandra is the name of the moon in Sanskrit. So it's like, I just look up at the moon and go like, oh, hi, Chandra. I mean, I do it all the time anyway. I don't have debilitated moon, but I always do it whenever I see the sun. I mean, I do Surya Namaskar and everything every morning, but it's like, Chandra as well. Like whenever I see the moon, it's like, I just always say hi, sometimes a little bow, just gratitude to, the cosmos and to nature and to it. And once you start doing it, like it triggers this like little effect that it starts happening like everywhere. I mean, Venus with creativity, for example, if you don't have that, I would say start drawing or doodling or just doing something that is creative in some way. Do you mean like if it's Mercury, it'd be like start journaling.
Mm.
Mercury's all about communication, it's all about the throat. So it's like start journaling, start writing, something. Like it doesn't have to be like, dear diary, today I, did this. It can just be I'm feeling this particular way right now, or blah, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Saturn, I would say like have some discipline around something, maybe choose something to do. Saturn's a really good one as well. If you don't have anything like that either, you can also do going and helping an elderly person or feeding a homeless person or, doing things like that as well. But it's not like paying money to go and do that. It's like you have to actually go and do it,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
so it could be like going and
Seva,
working in one of those, like, yeah, it's like a saver, like go and work in one of those, like,
soup kitchen.
food soup kitchen. That's the word I
Mm-hmm.
was looking for. That, do that kind of stuff. Jupiter, I would say learn something, do something spiritual, go learn to meditate, go, if you don't already, or if you haven't got a consistent practice, like have a 30-day consistent practice, like, and then you'll normally find that after that you're consistent all the time anyway. Just little things like that, So I think that's like, Rahu and Ketu are normally like a bit harder, but in terms of like balancing them, I would just say, do some breath work and just making sure that you're like aligned and stuff. Because with Rahu and Ketu, even the japa practices, I'm always like, unless I know that you're someone who's, I feel like they're very powerful japa practices, unless there's some, because you need to kind of do them because they're actually the same
Right,
person, the
right.
same thing.
Two halves
You
of the
need to do
one.
both of them. So it's like, it takes you 80 days to do that practice. That's like, it's almost like a 3-month practice. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're going to do it properly. And I think that, unless you're going to commit to that, then there's no use even starting that. You'd be better off doing, looking at other parts of it, like, so be looking at like those other
You
things. Yeah.
mentioned pranayama. Is there one that kind of covers a lot, like your favorite one, for example? What's your favorite one that seems to be really good for pretty much everyone? Not, I mean, of course, this is like hugely general. We have to generalize because it's hard to get into detail of every single. There's so many layers of pranayama, and there's also so many layers of these planets and a person's chart. But like for me in particular, like in my Ayurveda practice, Nadi Shodhana is probably the number one most universally applicable to most people, because it's just balancing the breath and the Ida and Pingala Nadi, and just getting both sides of your body energetically aligned and harmony and equal. Um, and of course, that there will always be a person who, no, lunar breath would be better, or no, solar breath would be better, or no, Kapalabhati breath would be better. But Nadi
Yeah.
Shodhana for me has been the most useful to have in my back pocket for people.
Yeah, I think, or even just a slow pranayama
Slow,
practice,
see,
just
yeah,
like, just like inhaling through the nose,
and maybe
exhaling, like,
without the
just going
holding.
inside. Because
Or do you think the breath retention is an important part?
um I do actually like the breath retention. Yeah, so I think that you could do a bit of pranayama and then also just like close both nostrils and like hold the breath for just for as long as it's comfortable. It doesn't have to be anything extreme,
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm,
unless you're doing like a full practice, then you can hold your breath for to 2 minutes if you want.
mm-hmm.
But it's just like I think slow pranayama is very good. I really find because I teach a class every Sunday actually in Bondi in Sydney. So if I try to do Nadi Shodhana in a class, like most people actually just can't do it.
Mm.
And I often try to think back to myself to think like when I first learnt Nadi Shodhana, was I struggling to do that? And it's very interesting to see like you know, is that me
I
or
think
you?
that's you. Sounds
Sorry,
like a FaceTime.
I don't have anything on it.
Or it's an alarm clock.
No, I think it stopped.
Okay.
Oh, hang on, it was actually a FaceTime. Sorry.
No, no worries.
So yeah, it's just like the I think slow pranayama is like really good, and I mean that's the one that I would probably give people most like for de-exciting and for like getting into alignment and stuff like that. Like I think that it's very beneficial, and it also balances the left and right sides of the body, balances left and right sides of the brain. It's like gentle. It's not too, nutty shodana can also be energizing. So if you're
Hmm.
doing it at night time, then it's not.
And for the people who struggle, like you said, sometimes your students struggle with that one. Do you just do like deep box breathing?
With Nadi
Uh-huh.
Shodhana, I just make them keep going because
Okay.
they've got to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
I feel that everyone should really learn how to
You
do
coach
it.
them through.
But it's just very interesting, like watching people. It actually just goes to show that it's very interesting to see how a lot of people don't know how to breathe properly,
Mm-hmm.
or even just coordination of like blocking your left nostril and your right
Mm-hmm.
nostril. Like something that you think is actually very simple and actually now comes second nature to us because
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing it for a long time. You realize when you start teaching like a weekly class and every week you're getting new students and there's like 30 people sitting in front of you and like you've seen like the ones that you say Nadi Shodhana. I mean, obviously, every week I have to explain it because every week I've got new students there or just people that have just come for the first time. So every week I'm explaining it, but it's funny. This week I really noticed that like all the people that have been coming consistently, like for a while, like they just started doing it. Like, and I
Really?
was like, oh, I like that because it's been my dream. How when like a nun teaches, like when we do his journeys and stuff, it's up for it. It's always like he just goes like, not a show enough.
Right,
And that's
right.
it. He just says what it is and then we just do
Uh-huh.
it. And if you don't know what you're doing, well then you need to look next to you to
Right.
see like what you're doing kind of thing. But it's yeah, I find sometimes I'd like to be able to just do that rather than have to explain every time. But actually explaining every time is always good too, like in terms of like always updating your teaching style and teaching knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think Nadi Shodhan is really great because that actually also has the breath of fire. Like you also like kind of pumping your
Mm-hmm.
stomach at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. I think breath of fire is actually a very powerful thing. I think everyone should do breath of fire for like 3 minutes when they wake up in the morning.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I think breath of fire because you're just forcefully exhaling to the nose, you're pumping the navel back towards the spine. It's activating
Mm-hmm.
the fire in the belly and in your digestive system and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's like firing up your digestive system for the day. It's also really creating fire and energy, almost like you're putting wood into a furnace and like doing it there. So all of a sudden everything's like kind of alive. And I think that breath of fire is like, that would be my favorite one. Pranayama, slow pranayama and breath of fire would be my thing. And then I would say if you could do Surya Namaskar, so learn how to do the salute to the sun. And if you can do it facing the sun, even better. But if you can't, even just facing the sun inside a building, if you just know which direction is east.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, that's all that you really need. If you just have that, you could have those really simple techniques. If you do you know, a few rounds of slow pranayama or nadi shodhana, bit of breath of fire, stand up, you should do 3 rounds of Surya Namaskar, but you have to do, because Surya Namaskar is like when you kneel down on one knee and stuff, is on each side. So it's literally like 6 times you end up doing it. So you can
Mm.
do it on each side. We want to keep everything balanced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. I know we went over. We were almost at like 2 hours,
It was bound
but
to
it was
happen. It
bound.
was bound to
Yeah,
happen.
it's too fun. It's just such a joy to go through these topics with people who have been studying and teaching for years, and it's always just my favorite thing to talk about. And you've been amazing, Geoff. It's great to hear about how you approach, first of all, how your journey with it, because I had no idea what led you to the place where you are now. And I'm so happy that you have a YouTube channel and that we can, help people, navigate through a lot of these things now with, I mean, all these amazing platforms. I actually just launched one this year. January 2nd was my first, like, slowly, it's a lot to get all of this content and distribute it to all the different platforms, because all the different platforms are very, very different. But it's
Exactly.
such a gift to be able to offer it. And so I just want to say thank you. This has been a pleasure and a joy to chat with you, to learn about how you approach astrology and meditation and a couple of your favorite pranayamas. And yeah, I'm just grateful that we got to do this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure to be able to do this with you too. I've really enjoyed it.
Yay! Thank you for listening to OJAS OASIS with Sasha Bershadsky. To learn more about Ayurvedic healing, please visit ojasoasis.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, have your smile.